Tired of restless nights? At Lisa, we know good sleep is essential for mental, physical, and emotional health. From memory foam mattresses to hybrids that keep you cool all night long, Lisa's mattresses offer exceptional comfort and support with free delivery and 100 nights to try out your mattress in the comfort of your home. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses plus 2 free pillows. Go to lisa.com/iHeart for an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.
At JCPenney, fashion counts for everybody and everybody. It's spring, and with the weather changing and so many great things coming up like Mother's Day and the Wind Down Tour, I definitely need a fresh spring wardrobe for every occasion. This spring, I'm looking for that perfect flowy spring dress for Mother's Day, as well as replacing my everyday basics. That's what I love about JCPenney. They have so many stylish and comfortable options that I always find just what I'm looking for there. Spring is a feel-good season and comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. The fashion at JCPenney is the same way. Refresh your wardrobe this spring with styles that gets you, something to wear that fits your favorite moments of the season at prices that feel just as good. Discover brands that get you and put style and comfort first, like Worthington and Liz Claiborne for her, each in women's petite and plus sizes, and Stafford and Mutual weave for him, style and comfort for all, even big and tall. Plus even more for the whole family like Levi's and Exertion. Here, spring comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors. JCPenney, make everybody count.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant Prime.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friday's Big Blue Kickoff Live, our last Friday show before the 2024 NFL Draft. It's all brought to you by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. I am John Schmeelk, joined by Paul Dottino. We'll take your calls at 201-939-4513. We have a couple guests coming on that you're familiar with. Kyle Krabs, who's been breaking down the draft with us for a long time, will join us in a couple minutes. And then we're going to have Arif Hasan join us at 1, and he does the consensus draft board each year to talk about which one of these guys maybe are more volatile and interesting nuggets that he pulled out of his consensus draft board. We'll try to squeeze in your calls between those two guests at 201-939-4513. Now let's say hello to our first guest. Friend of the program, he's been joining us for many years. Here he is, Kyle Krabs. Kyle, you got John Schmeelk and Paul Dottino here in East Rutherford, New Jersey. How you doing today, man?
Hey, John and Paul. How you guys doing?
Hey, Kyle. We're good, dude. First of all, tell the folks where they can find all your great draft work.
Yeah, for sure. I am on the Locked On Network with Joe Marino for Locked On NFL Scouting. We kind of look at the draft and team building across the league through a bit of a big picture perspective, kind of exploring all of the interwoven layers of all those decisions. And it's a really fun time of year for that, for the draft, just because of how many dominoes that fall with each decision that every team makes. And then I'm on social media at Grinding the Tape as well. So you can find my work on social media there. And Locked On NFL Scouting you can catch on YouTube or wherever you guys listen to your favorite podcasts.
Awesome. So, Kyle, let's start here. Where do you think you stand out in your evaluation of some of these guys? Who are maybe some of the guys that you either really like more than other people, or maybe some of the guys you don't like as much as some of the other people out there?
I think Joe Alt has the potential to be the best offensive player in the class. I am that high on. I know everybody with Marvin Harrison Jr. at the wide receiver position and Caleb Williams at quarterback. Like, I get it. But I just look at Joe Alt, his profile, the steps that he took this year and the growth that he showed with prototypical everything, and I think he has a chance to be like a gold jacket type player. Like, I'm that high on him. So I think that's, you asked me maybe a little bit against the consensus talking points, that's the first place that my mind goes.
Well, I think everybody thinks he's probably a top 5 pick or so it's not that far out of the realm of possibility. But, Kyle, let me ask you this. He's been a left tackle at Notre Dame, and everybody who talks about him in the conversation of should the Giants take him, obviously Andrew Thomas is their left tackle. Alt would have to go to right tackle. Does he have that high of a ceiling if he's on the other side as opposed to where he played with the Irish?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for reasons to not be scared off by that idea, you did see Notre Dame do some unbalanced line stuff in which he did move around, so he did get some limited reps, getting looks on the other side, and length and power is length and power. Maybe there's a little bit of a transition period there as far as the muscle memory with the adjusted stance, but I didn't see anything in those reps where you did see him asked to play on the right side of the line that would give you this big cause for concern that there would be a drop-off of any level of significance, especially if he was given the chance to grow there long-term.
Well, Kyle, you mentioned the top wide receivers. How do you stock those top three, and would you consider all three, Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, a potential top 10 pick in most drafts?
Yeah, so I have all three of those guys are in my top 8 on my draft board this year. So it's a good year to need wide receiver. I think the Giants find themselves in a pretty attractive spot in that regard. I have it Harrison 1, Neighbors 2, and Odunze 3, but the separation between the guys is not particularly large. I think there's different appealing qualities to each of the guys, where if you wanted the run-after-catch guy, I do think Malik Neighbors is probably the most appealing in that regard. And I think what's interesting about that is you look across the league and you look at the trends of defenses and playing too high safety shells and trying to eliminate the vertical reads in the passing game. The guys who are making a lot more of the explosive plays are the guys who can catch it underneath and create a missed tackle with the ball in their hands. And that's really what Neighbors does best out of all three of those guys that I think gives him a compelling argument for some teams.
Okay, so you're with the consensus of the top 3 receivers, but receivers 4 and 5, most people seem to think Thomas is number 4. I haven't seen a consensus on number 5. Who do you have in those 2 spots?
So Thomas is a really interesting player because I think if you look at the long-term scope, you can see why there's so much enthusiasm there. He has the uncoachables with the explosiveness. He's an ultimate height, weight, speed type player. I do wonder how vast his role will be when he first comes into the league, where he had a lot of his production out of the slot. He had a lot of his production running hitches and fades from the slot. Can you give us a little bit more diverse of a menu from that right away? If so, I think the athletic profile is going to win out there, and I think long-term he's got a great chance to be a much more complete receiver. I like Xavier Leggett from South Carolina, and I like Ricky Pearsall from Florida. Those are 2 very different players than Thomas, and 2 very different players from each other. Leggett, I think, runs a little bit better routes than maybe he's given credit for in the vertical plane as far as being a middle-of-the-field, deep cross, running post. He's very deceptive at the top of those kinds of routes with his stems, and some of that comes from just he's like a 220-pound receiver that hits 22 miles per hour on the gun. When you're that big and that physical, you can run through a lot of contact. It does create some respect for guys to when they're trying to cap your vertical route stem, and he's pretty savvy with his feet and his head at the top of those kinds of routes. So I think that's where he pops. And then I love that South Carolina manufactured him some touches where they got him the ball underneath and ran screens with him and just ran quick hitches with him. And it's one-on-one outside the numbers, and he forces somebody to miss a tackle. Like, all of that kind of stuff, I actually think is a little bit more of a diverse way to impact the game than what Brian Thomas brings to the league right away. The question is Brian Thomas just going to be that dominant at that specific thing that he's shown he does most consistently on tape?
Now, if McCarthy is the quarterback who has ridden the hype train all the way up to the top of this draft in the last 2 months, Worthy, the wide receiver out of Texas, since his combine number, which was record-breaking in the 40, has been the receiver who's been riding the hype train. Where did you have him earlier, and have you moved him significantly in recent times as he has picked up a lot of steam?
Yeah, I think speed's one of those tough things where once you get past like 4.3, it's just such diminishing returns on how much faster you can be than 4.3 because you're already like a 99th percentile speed guy anyway. So we knew he could blaze, right? And when you watch him on tape, I think the thing that Worthy does, whether it's underneath or it's vertical, he erases angles as good as anybody. And I think that does give him some run-after-catch appeal as well, just for if you can hit him in rhythm, the way he will accelerate out of the catch point will break a lot of angles and create a lot of added yardage. So I didn't necessarily say that I boosted or juiced his grade any more than I would have liked him otherwise, and I think he's firmly in the tier 2 of wide receivers. I think there's probably 5 or 6 guys that are kind of in that tier 2 of wide receivers for me. If you put the 3 guys up in tier 1, that they're all have different strengths, and it's just a matter of choose whatever flavor of ice cream you like. And if you want the guy who has that kind of blazing speed and you're not intimidated by his stature and put off by that as an investment opportunity as a team that's picking, that would be the guy that I would go in that tier 2 if you just want the pure speed guy.
We're joined by Kyle Krabs from the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast. Does a great job breaking down players, as he has with us for a few years now. Kyle, Paul mentioned J.J. McCarthy there. How do you have these top 6 or maybe 7, depending on how you're ranked, quarterbacks stacked, and kind of break them into tiers for me on when you would start thinking about these guys and why you order them that way?
Yeah, I think Caleb Williams is in a league of his own for me. Just when you look at the full body of work, you see what he's capable of doing in structure, even if he's not consistent with working within the structure of his offense. I thought their offense really regressed this past year without Jordan Addison. So you look within the context there, you understand why some of the struggles were there, but it doesn't explain all of his issues. And I certainly don't think he's a transcendent player. I don't think he's somebody you could put into any situation across the league and he's immediately going to make you a 10-plus win football team. From there, it gets really muddy because everybody has, in my mind, their own unique strengths. They have their own ability to execute an offense. Do you want somebody who can make the plays outside of structure? Do you want somebody who's just going to keep it between the lines? If you want somebody who can really thrive outside of structure, I would put it Jaden Daniels and then Drake May. If you want the guys that are going to operate within the structure of your offense and maybe are still athletic and can get off the spot, but they don't shine creating plays, they're less play creators and more of executors of the play design as it's called, I would put it McCarthy, and then I'd put Bo Nix next out of that group. The one I really struggle with the most is Michael Penix, just because he played in a really explosive vertical game offense where they love to push the ball down the field. I thought those receivers made a lot of plays for him.
Yeah, they did.
And I kind of saw some bad habits. Like he really leaned on his arm at times, and it really hurt him in the timing elements of the offense or accuracy in the shorter and intermediate areas of the field. I thought he was money on bucket throws down the field and the big post right down the middle. And those speed outs, I thought he threw with really good timing because he could see that well. But the stuff over the middle of the field, I didn't think he had a consistent feel or confidence throwing over the middle. And then in some of those instances where he's late, he's not getting his feet back around and he's really inaccurate with some of those throws. And then you pair in the fact that he's an older player with an injury history. And it's just not – I wouldn't have a lot of enthusiasm in the stratosphere in which he's being talked about predictably getting drafted.
Where would you feel comfortable drafting him? Just out of curiosity, when does that point start for you? Round 2 or round 3?
I think sometime on day 2. For me personally, probably not in the 40s. And you certainly hope that the rest of the teams that are quarterback needy have had their chance to bat, and you don't need to overdraft them anyway in that regard. I could see why some teams would kind of prefer Spencer Rattler over him as well as a day 2 option, but I wouldn't force that one just because there's a lot there that I just don't know about the translatability of it.
You know, Kyle, it's kind of crazy because we certainly have heard from a selection of folks since the Combine that maybe these quarterbacks don't have higher than a second or third round grade after the top guys. But we all know they're going to get pushed up, right? Because there are teams that are so desperate they can't help themselves. But here's the thing that I have trouble with. You get these organizations that spend millions of dollars and have spent how many years scouting these guys, putting all these resources into it, and then they're going to say, you know what, though? We're so itchy for a quarterback, we're going to ignore all that stuff, and we're drafting him 4th overall in the draft. It boggles the mind at how teams could actually throw away all of what they've done and then just scratch an itch because there's so much hype about these guys. Does that bother you at all as someone who pays attention to the tape?
I think so, but I also understand for some of the teams why, where if you're coaching for your job or if you need the pressure or if you need an extension on the job that you've been doing because your team's been underperforming, sometimes the selling point is, well, I just picked my guy at quarterback. I need more time. And that usually doesn't work out well. I don't think it's a coincidence that those kinds of decisions end up with the coach ultimately getting fired, and then somebody else comes in and they give it a year and a half, and then they say, oh, well, I want my guy at quarterback, so we're not going to do this guy anymore. And, that's just I think it's one of the super unfortunate byproducts of how much pressure there is to win within the league and win quickly, that sometimes the players that need the time to be assessed and then surrounded with players that complement them, it's become all about, well, you got to win in your rookie quarterback window, because if you don't do that, then you got to pay the quarterback too much, and you're not going to be able to field a competitive team around them. And it's that really toxic couple of drains that teams seem to circle way too often that does not organizationally put that player that they're picking, who otherwise might have a chance to be successful, even if he does have questions or limitations, in the best position to be a successful player.
Yeah, great answer.
I call that the alibi theory.
No, great answer. I think, Kyle, I think that is a great answer. All right, let's touch on a couple of Giant needs here on day 2, Kyle. Let's switch to the defensive side of the ball. Giants have a couple spots there they need to fill. Let's start with corner. I had a lot of trouble when I stacked my corners, Kyle, differentiating between everyone in the second tier from the second to the third round. Once you get past those top 5 guys, no one tested particularly great. A lot of 4 or 5 guys, which frankly on that Indianapolis turf is not a great time for a cornerback. And a lot of those guys aren't that big. And the big guys didn't test that well either. How do you kind of sort through those day 2 corners? And does anybody from that group really stand out to you as would be a great value in round 2 or round 3?
Yeah, it's a really interesting group, because I think some of the best instinct guys were the guys that didn't test well.
Exactly,
like
1,000%.
So it's like, okay, do I want a more instinctual player who maybe is not going to be able to take every matchup on the perimeter across the league, or do I want to take the guy that's got the length and the straight line speed and the vertical ability to play on an island, who maybe is just too loose in his footwork and his route anticipation and his instincts and his play processing to stay super sticky in coverage? The way that I have it kind of tiered after the big 3, 4, 5 guys with I have it Mitchell, Arnold, Wiggins, McKinstry, and then I have Cooper DeJean as somebody who I think could play corner or safety. The next guy I have is a nickel. It's Mike Sandersill from Michigan.
Oh, me too. He's also my 6th guy. Kyle, I'm with you on that. He's a smart player, man.
He's a dude, and the crazy thing about Sandersill is he's only been playing corner for 2 years. He was a wide receiver at Michigan. And the instincts that he shows in spite of that was really what blew me away. I said, look, okay, he's not going to play on the outside. He's going to have to be a nickel because of his stature and his frame. Big body guys on the perimeter, if you try and press him, are just really going to give him a hard time. And if you play him in off coverage and play zones, I think he's going to get bodied too much at the catch point down the field on the outside. So I think he's a nickel exclusive player, but he is my corner 6. After that, I like TJ Tampa from Iowa State. I like Renardo Green from Florida State.
Me too.
I like Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri, and I like Abrams Drain as well from Missouri, but I like Rakestraw more. And then Max Melton from Rutgers is kind of my next tier of corners. Is Tampa, Green, Rakestraw, Melton, Abrams Drain. I think all of those guys have some level of appeal, but they also have some level of a question where you're going to have to assess, do I want the length and physicality? Do I want the coverage instincts? I think the Missouri kids were both outstanding with just their vision, their feel, how they played coverage this past year, but they didn't test great.
See, the beauty of those corners, though, I think, Kyle, is that in many of those cases, certainly not up very high at the top, you're able to wean those guys in. And that may actually answer some of those questions because the guy gets in and they say, okay, you'll be our 3rd corner for the time being. And we'll kind of work you in and polish you up. And then before you know it, all those questions that you had may be answered by the time the season's over and the guy turns out to be a big star.
Yeah, I think that's the player development, the blessing and the curse of being a first-round pick is the weight of expectations that comes with it. Where some of these day 2 guys, the fan base isn't pounding on the table come week 3 if you're not a starter for your football team. And corner's one of those spots, too, where, the confidence at that position, and I've seen it firsthand. I'm a big time Dolphins guy, right? And I watched that team take a former wide receiver, turn corner after 2 years in the first round in Noah Igbenogany, and they traded down and got him at 30. And the fan base still collectively lost its mind that this guy was not playing at the start of the season, and then he gets in and he gets absolutely cooked by Seattle and the Buffalo Bills and Stephon Diggs, and he was never the same. He never recovered, and they had to pull the cord after year 3.
Yeah.
So, it's a real thing with corners, too, as far as just you want to make sure when those guys play, it's because they're ready to play, not because you need somebody to plug in.
Yep.
All right, how about safety, Kyle? A lot of different shapes and sizes here, guys that do different things well. Not sure we're going to see a safety go before pick 45, pick 50. We'll see. But your thoughts on this day 2 safety class and who might be a good fit in Shane Bowen's defense, which is a lot of zone, a lot of split safety. So you need a guy that can do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, I think that from a versatility standpoint, there are 4 guys that really stand out to me if you're going to include Cooper DeJean in that conversation. I think predictably he's probably going to go in the mid-20s anyway.
Yeah. So
maybe not in the conversation on day 2, which leaves you with 3 guys. And I know one of them is a consensus top 50 player in Bullard from Georgia, Javon Bullard, who I think has excellent football IQ. He's not the biggest, he's not the longest, but he's a very good tackler. He sees the entire field really well. He communicates well. That Georgia defense under Kirby Smart, they ask a lot of their guys. And he has shown, in my mind, a mastery of that I feel like that is an NFL-ready player coming out. After that, I think it does get off the beaten path a little bit. I know Tyler Nubin was somebody people were really excited about. He didn't test particularly well, and I think there are some athleticism questions there as far as, even historical data-wise. He's a below-average size-adjusted athlete, whereas Dadrian Taylor-Demerson from Texas Tech really caught my eye for the athletic profile, and he's a good tackler, and he had to play in the Big 12, or at least what the Big 12 used to be. And those college spread offenses at that conference at the time, it's already so much more grass that you have to cover, even though everybody's playing drop 8, because everybody's playing these wide open air raid offenses and then throwing the ball all over the field. So he caught my eye as somebody who could play some man-to-man. He was a plus athlete. He tested well. And then the other one who I see more of early on day 3, but I do think he is a plug-and-play starter, specifically in a split-field defense that has versatility for their safeties, is Ketan Oladapo from Oregon State.
He's a big kid, man. He's big.
He's 6'2", 210 plus.
Mm-hmm.
He's long. He's another guy who tackles really well. He smacks some dudes around. And then they moved him around this past year. His 2 years before that as a starter in Oregon State, he was mostly a deep safety. This past year, they moved him up on the second level. They played him in the nickel. They matched him man on tight ends. He was a quarterback spy on third and longs against mobile quarterbacks. He did a lot, and he did it really, really well. He made plays in just about every phase. He's the guy that really jumped off to me as he's really explosive, he's long, he's physical, and now he's showing he's got versatility to his game too.
Kyle, I'm going to go to the edge rushers because Verse, Turner, and Latu, those top 3 seem to be getting the most ink. Now, I'm going to ask you to put the injury thing aside with Latu. I want to strictly go by what you have seen on tape. How likely is it if the quarterbacks and the receivers and Alt and maybe even Bowers weren't clogging the pipeline, how many of those 3 guys would potentially be in the top 5 conversation in a normal year, so to speak?
I don't know about top 5. I'd feel pretty good saying top 10.
Okay.
I think this is a group that they do have individual holes or questions in their game. I think Jared Verse is the most complete body type and style of play and translatability and playing both the run and the pass. You just wish that it was on all the time. I think there were some times where he, in the midst of a really competitive Florida State front, wasn't the guy that was finishing some plays, but when he was at his best. I thought he was the most complete edge rusher of this group. I think Latu was the best pass rusher of this group by far, as far as the pass rush counters, the snap anticipation, the usage of his hands, how he corners when he gets hit the hip with an offensive tackle and flattens to the quarterback. That's where he was at his best. But I did see some instances, particularly in the run game, where if the point of attack gets stretched out, he gets stretched out along with it, and not in the way that I'm setting an edge, more in the way that I'm getting run out of the blocks here.
Okay.
So I think that, for me, was the question that I had with Latu. And then Dallas Turner, I think, is the most physically gifted and highest potential of all three of these guys, with the length and the explosiveness, and he ran 4.5, and he's got 34-inch arms, all that stuff. But I thought he was the guy who had the furthest to go as far as adding refinement to his game and not thriving just off of his athleticism as a player. I thought both the other two guys were more refined in the finer points of hand usage, defending the run, anchoring the point of attack, where he's just the most gifted, and he's been able to use it to this point in time.
Howard Cross believes you. Roll Tide and Honor Howard.
Defensive tackles, Kyle, second round. Giants looking for a 3 technique to put next to Dexter Lawrence long term. I think there are some interesting round 2, round 3, even early round 4 guys here that can fit that bill. Give me 1 or 2 that you particularly like.
Well, I'm surprised that Johnny Newton's not getting more consistent top 32 buzz from Illinois. I know
He's really good.
Jones fracture that he played the second half of the season with and got it fixed, and I don't know if that's the motivating factor for why he's consistently not in everybody's top 32s. But for whatever reason, if he slips a little bit into day 2, somebody's going to get an unbelievable pass rusher as an interior player there who can kick out over top offense.
You know what's funny about him, Kyle? And I want to ask you about him real quick, but and then we can talk about some deeper guys. The one thing, he does not have an explosive get off. Like, the snap will come, he kind of stands up without going forward, but then he's so quick and so good with his hands that he wins anyway. And I just wonder, without that explosive get-off, is that type of style going to work in the NFL?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask. I would say the guys that are able to correlate their interior rush success, it is more dependent on playing off of hands as compared to just shooting gaps.
Fair point.
I've seen more pure gap shooters fail than I have guys that are really refined with their hand pass rush counters.
That's a good answer.
As they come into the league. But if you want to get into pure first step penetrator types, I think Michael Hall from Ohio State comes to mind as far as really explosive first step. And he's got some length too. He's got 33-inch arms, so he's not like a lot of these Ohio State guys traditionally the past 10 years or so when they've come out. They're squatty, low-to-the-ground type builds, and Hall's like that, but they also don't have the length to be able to keep their chest clean and when they get chest-to-chest or in hand-to-hand combat with guys. I like him next in line. I do think there's a kind of a drop-off between the top 2 guys in Murphy and Newton and him, but if you ask me who my third interior defensive lineman was, I like him a lot.
You like him more than Fisk out of Florida State?
I have a really hard time with Fisk. He plays super hard. He's got a really good first step.
And a great motor, too. I mean, holy smokes.
He plays his rear end off, but a lot of his production is cleanup off of playing really hard, or he's winning right away because he uses his first step quickness. He's somebody, I think there have been 12 interior defensive linemen since 2000 that have come through the combine that had shorter arms than him. He's got 30.5-inch arms. And it's just a historical outlier that's really difficult, especially if you're talking about in the second round. If you get into the third round and you want to lean on the athleticism, I think you can look within the division to what the Eagles did when they drafted Milton Williams out of Louisiana Tech a couple of years ago. And he's become a really nice rotational role player, but he hasn't gotten more play because he can't win the hand-to-hand combat inside when everything is so tight and congested. And that's the same question I have for this.
All right, final one, Kyle, before we say goodbye. If you were to take a day 3 flyer on a tight end that you think has a shot to become something because of traits, who would you roll the dice on?
Oh, man.
It's a tough class, I know.
I would say I actually like the group quite a bit of just like I wonder who actually makes it to day 3. I would say Theo Johnson from Penn State, but I'm not convinced he makes it to day 3.
Okay.
He's a former wide receiver at 6'6", 260 pounds. And another player that just came out of that offense the year prior went in the second round of the Jaguars in last year's draft, despite not having a lot of good receiving production. So I would say Theo Johnson's the first that comes to mind if he makes it. If he doesn't make it, I kind of like Dallin Holker from Colorado State. He was at BYU. He's an older player. He did the 2-year mission thing and then transferred this past year to Colorado State. But they moved him all around. They ran screens with him. They ran him across the set in pre-snap motion. They threw him the ball up in high-point situations in the red zone. He was really slippery after the catch. He's somebody that just looks like he's got really good receiving chops to be a complementary player in a passing offense at some point.
Guys, if you like what you hear, go check out Kyle Krabs on the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast with our buddy Joe Marino. He's on with them, both good dudes. They know their stuff. Make sure you go check that out. Kyle, thank you so much for the time today, man. Enjoy the next 4 or 5 days. The hay's in the barn. Now we just got to see what these teams decide to do.
Take care, Kyle.
Thanks, guys. It was great talking with you. Take care.
Always good talking to you, my friend. Kyle Krabs. Every year we have him on, I come away, I'm like, yeah, you can always tell when people do the work. And you could tell he does the work.
He breathes it.
No, he does. And
he
because his opinions, and you always know by who doesn't have the consensus opinion. By who says, well, I saw this one thing that I didn't like, and I can't get over it. And I appreciate that because I have that with guys too. When you actually watch them and you really understand these guys, there are some things that as evaluators you have trouble getting past, and everyone has those little nuggets here or there, and I appreciate Kyle being out of the consensus on some things.
Well, it's important because there are too many folks in our business who will just parrot what they've heard somebody else say. And that's where you get the fire that sets the entire forest ablaze, and everybody says, oh, well, that must be true, because perception then becomes reality. That's why the list of guests, John, that you usually get us at the Combine, and then obviously in the weeks leading up to the draft, I find it so refreshing to be able to talk to so many of the guys who are not afraid to step out on their own and say, look, I know that you've got 75 beat writers around the country telling you this, but I'm sorry, this is what I see. Have the guts to say what you see. I love that. I love that.
But at the same time, history has shown that the general consensus across the board does hold pretty well in terms of predicting how well a lot of these players are going to turn out. So to discuss that, we're joined, as we are every year. He does a really nice job covering the NFL, has done for a really long time. Arif Hasan, he covers the NFL, and every year he puts out his consensus draft board, which, really gives us a sense of where these players will get picked or should get picked. So why don't we start there? Arif, what do you think, and thank you for joining us as always, my friend, what do you think the value and importance is of the consensus draft board if you're doing things like we are and we're trying to figure out where these players should go in the draft, and then talk about what your workflow is and how you go about your procedure in putting this together?
Yeah, sure. I think that there's two pretty big, benefits to this. One is that I think it nails people's feet to the floor. I think we have all these conversations, is this guy good? Here are my concerns. I think this guy is overhyped. Well, if that's all the case, what do you think? Where do you rank him? Where would you pick him? And I think having everybody's rank order tells us a lot about what they actually think about a player, because a lot of times people will disagree about how good a player is and then rank them like right next to each other. It's not really that big of a disagreement. So I like that. But the other thing is that it kind of evens out all of this, right? So you've got somebody who might, have a bias towards people who test really well at the Combine, or people who were really, really productive in college, or people who have really good technical skills, right? You kind of get to meet out all of that bias by making sure that you get as many people as possible contributing to a project like this. So right now I've got about 75 analysts' rankings in. I'll probably have 85 by the time the draft is complete, and that has historically given us a really good idea of who might actually do well in the draft once we have the ability to kind of eliminate all of these biases. And as for my process, a lot of it is just having been in the industry for long enough. I've been talking to a lot of people, who have done this. And so I ask them for their boards, I put them together, and I make sure that those boards are published. I make sure that those boards have some sort of backing behind them, so you've got scouting reports attached to them or something like that. But it is pretty open. I don't want to limit it to just the 5 or 10 guys you get at big media outlets. I want to make sure that there are as many opinions as possible contributing to this board so I can get a really true understanding of where these things are.
And just to understand, these are big boards, not mock drafts, correct, that you're putting together?
Correct. Yeah, I don't use mock drafts here because, obviously team needs will matter, trades change things, all sorts of things. So this is just instead of trying to predict what teams will do, it's just how good do you think a player is.
And by the way, before we move on, tell the folks where they can find, Arif, all your work and your consensus board before we start digging deeper.
Yeah, it's over at wideleft.football, which is my Substack, the consensus board is free. Most Substacks, obviously, are subscription, and there's exclusive access, which is true for my pieces as well, but the consensus board itself, 100% free.
All right, so let's look at the top 5 on your consensus as I've pulled it up. And what I would like to know from you is, based on the results that you've seen, what was the degree of separation between these top 5? You got Marvin Harrison Jr., Caleb Williams, Malik Neighbors, Drake May, and Joe Alt.
Yeah, so I found this really interesting. Caleb Williams has more people ranked him number 1 overall than anyone else, but he's ranked 2 on the consensus board. And the reason for that is if you didn't rank Caleb Williams number 1, you probably ranked him 4 or 5. But if you didn't rank Marvin Harrison 1, you probably ranked him 2.
Okay.
So Marvin Harrison has fewer number 1 votes, but he's the number 1 player on the board because everyone just agrees this guy's number 1 or number 2. He's fantastic. So I found that really interesting. There are a couple of people that have Malik Neighbors number 1. I think 2 boards. There's 5 boards out there that have Drake May number 1, but really there's a huge separation between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then Joe Alt, everybody loves Alt. He's basically everyone's, offensive lineman number 1, but he just doesn't. He's not close to the rest of the top 4. So I find that kind of interesting. Even though Drake May is one of the prospects that people kind of disagree on most in the draft, the average ranking here is just so significantly higher.
Interesting. All right, so you have a big gap after 4. Then I'm curious when your next big gap happens. My guess is that it would be after Jaden Daniels at 8, but I'm curious to see where that next tier kind of levels off for you.
Actually, let me take a look. Yeah, you're right. It's Jaden Daniels 8 to Olufoshanu at 9, so there is a separation there just in terms of the average point ranking that we get. Another interesting case because a lot of people, in fact, more than any other player that I have, people disagree on Jaden Daniels the most, at least within the top 100. There are a couple of players outside of the top 100 that people disagree on a little bit more. But, he's the most polarizing prospect, I think, in the draft, obviously for, a number of reasons, whether you don't like the offense he was in, whether, he's a one-year wonder or, is it just because he throws to the outside and deep all the time? Can he manage kind of the small stuff? Does he keep his eyes up when he scrambles? People have a lot of different opinions. This happens a lot with, athletic quarterbacks that have tools but are not necessarily, completely accurate or use the entire field.
Something that sticks out like a sore thumb for me is that, and I know you have a big board, so you're not talking about mock drafts, but you're talking about where players are ranked on people's boards. J.J. McCarthy, number 22, as quarterback 4, and yet most mock drafts are obviously saying he's going top 5, which is a huge disparity.
Quarterback inflation's a thing, baby.
I mean, the quarterback hype train is in full gear, and I think your information and your research shows how much that hype is just incredibly overblown right now.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated because I don't think we've ever had a draft where, quarterbacks have gone 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be such a weird draft for that to be the first time that that's happened, right? Because like you mentioned, McCarthy is at 22. Actually, last week, while I was putting him together, he was at 25 and he rose to 22 by including the last couple of boards. But very few people have him in the top 10. Like you said, quarterback inflation is a thing. People care about it. It actually seems to have a smaller impact than we think. A lot of guys, that are ranked in the 40s, a lot of people talk about them as like, oh, that guy will sneak into the first round. That almost never happens. There is quarterback inflation. People always overdraft quarterbacks, and I think you should. I think that's the smart thing to do. But it is really stunning how far, people will go to try and, I don't know if they're trying to create a storyline. Maybe teams actually do like McCarthy a lot more than the board. That does happen sometimes. But just how far people will go, especially on quarterbacks, because, who drives views and clicks more than quarterbacks?
No doubt.
A great conversation.
Clickbait is very tasty. You've also got Michael Penix at 35 and Bo Nix at 38. Now, that's not too much of a stretch or a reach to think that those guys could actually sneak into the bottom of the first round based on those numbers.
Yeah, I think that's very possible. As soon as you get into the 40s, I'm kind of skeptical of that capacity. But at 35, certainly, especially because you have to consider, you want the fifth-year option that's a little bit more valuable at quarterbacks than anywhere else. Teams at the bottom of the first are very likely to want to trade down just because they have a lot of talent, so they want to build for depth or something along those lines. So now you've got teams at the top of the second who maybe they picked an offensive tackle or a receiver at the top of the first, and now they've got their chance to get a quarterback. Well, they need to jump ahead of people like the Broncos and the Raiders and whoever, and so they'll trade up into the top. So I think certainly we'll see some movement at the bottom of the first. I've seen a couple of mock drafts that say, hey, if the Vikings miss out on, trading up for a quarterback, maybe at 23, they'll pick a Michael Penix. And that feels a little high based off of this.
Now, last one on the quarterbacks. It's not even specifically about the quarterbacks, but oftentimes we hear about players, and specifically this year with J.J. McCarthy, Arif, that the line is, well, NFL front offices like them a lot better than the analyst community on the outside in the media. Historically speaking, does that generally work out well for NFL teams when they're that far off of where this consensus is? And how risky is that proposition if you work too far off of where this kind of consensus lands these players?
Like anything, it depends, right? There are a lot of cases where the NFL has disagreed substantially and they've been right. A lot of cases where they've been wrong. But on the aggregate, when the NFL and the consensus board disagree a little bit, the NFL is almost always right. When they disagree a lot, the consensus board is usually right. The one difference is when a player falls pretty far in the draft, the NFL usually knows something.
Yeah, medical, off the field, something like that, right? Yeah. And so I guess my question, when you say a little and a lot, when you say a little, you mean like a handful of spots? When you say a lot, you mean like more than 15 or 20? Is that kind of what you're looking at?
Yeah, mostly, and it changes based off of like where you are in the draft, because 5 spots in the first round means a lot more than 5 spots in the fifth round. But yeah, basically. But yeah, if a team reaches by 10 spots on the board or something like that, historically I've found about 65% of the time the consensus board is typically correct that was a reach, and the NFL is correct about 35% of the time. That's the rough number. So
GMs would love to hear that.
Well, think about it this way. It only takes one team to reach, right?
Yeah.
But it takes all 32 teams for somebody to fall.
No, it's a great point.
How true is that? How true is that? Okay. Now, this may be a little bit tougher. Aside from the quarterback hype, and we've already talked about McCarthy and the other 2 quarterbacks in terms of where they fell on your consensus this year, aside from those guys, who surprised you the most in terms of he was a lot higher than you thought when you started the process, and the guy who was a heck of a lot lower than you thought when you started? Or maybe the guy didn't even wind up on the board and you were like, man, I thought he was for sure a second-round pick, and he didn't make your top 100.
Yeah, I think the guy that surprised me in terms of how high he was ranked is probably Graham Barton, who, if you've been following kind of some of the conversation about offensive linemen in this draft, he's rocketed up in the discussion. Well, it turns out that hype seems to be real. I didn't really think of him as a first-round pick in January or February when people talking about, and this is an offensive line draft where you could see 12 of them go in the first round, right? But he wasn't one of them. He was talked about as a second-round pick. Now a bunch of people have taken a look at him, broken down his film, have got the character reports or whatever back, and he is generally regarded as a first-round pick. He's 28th on the board right now. I suspect when I get, the final couple of boards in, he'll actually raise even a little bit more, maybe up to 25. But, he's a guy that might end up becoming the top center in the draft despite, all of this stuff that people have been saying about Jackson Powers Johnson, who on film to me looks fantastic. There's all these character reports that, maybe he isn't completely emotionally mature yet or something. I don't know. That's not something I can speak to, but, he's been falling a little bit. So we could see Graham Barton move up a little bit in the draft. As for guys that dropped a little bit more than I expected, the safety class is always kind of weird. So people like Cameron Kitchens, ended up falling a little bit more than I thought. Renardo Green, a cornerback at Florida State, fell a little bit further than I thought. And then, I live in Minnesota, so watching the Big Ten, Tanner Bortolone from Wisconsin, I thought that he played pretty well, but he's generally guarded as like a 4th or 5th round pick. I thought maybe he could slip into the bottom of the 2nd. It is a tough offensive line class to just be okay in, so that might be why. But, it's kind of one of those situations where it's like, hey, a lot of people don't actually like this guy that much.
All right, I want to rapid fire, Arif, a couple of what I consider clusters of guys at certain positions. You could even give really short yes or no answers if you want. It seemed like, just real quick at corner, Mitchell and Arnold are almost 50-50 who's corner 1, who's corner 2.
Yeah, basically 11 and 12, yep.
And that next group of corner with DeJean, Wiggins, and Kool-Aid McKinstry, are those guys as tightly put together as they seem on the consensus?
Yeah. People have disagreements. Each one of them is ranked cornerback 3 at different points. So yeah, they're very tightly ranked.
And how thick is that next kind of tier of cornerbacks after those top 2? I had a lot of trouble sorting through the 2nd and 3rd round corners from my perspective, putting my stacks together. How tightly and wound together is that next group of corners, and how much different are all these boards when you put them together in aggregate?
Yeah, there's a lot of disagreement. First of all, there's just not that many corners outside of the first round. You're taking a look at people like Ennis Rakestraw, Kamari Lassiter, people like T.J. Tampa, and there is a huge it's not as if everybody's ranking them in the same order, but there's a huge disagreement about kind of where generally, they rank. I've got some of these guys ranking them in the 40s, some of these guys ranking the very same people in the 50s and 60s. It seems like there's just not a lot of agreement over these cornerbacks that are projected to go in the 2nd round. The one exception, I think, is Mike Sanderstill, who's projected as a nickel corner, so that might be why. People love him. Right now he's 58th on the consensus board. When I started out, he was like 65th. He snuck into basically 2nd round. And again, I suspect he's a guy that by the time I get all of these boards together or I update all of these boards, he's going to get up into the 40s. So that might be the one exception, is that people really like him.
The follow-up I was going to ask Ari on that one is the inside-outside capability of the corners. Did you find that there was a definite characteristic that, okay, guys who are slots or guys who are outside were generally rated or regarded higher, or the guys that had the versatility to play in and out were guys that seemed to be clustered higher?
Yeah, I think a couple of years ago, people who had, versatility, they were actually dinged for being tweeners. And now versatility is this huge asset. Somebody like a Cooper DeJean is ranked really highly because he can play inside, outside, maybe even safety. And then when you look at the scouting reports for somebody like a Terrion Arnold, people say, hey, he played on the outside, he's got all the size, but his fluidity allows him to play in the nickel, so you can maybe put him in the nickel, and that's a positive now. And it used to be kind of a negative where people thought, well, you don't know where to play him. It's still kind of a knock on corners to be under 5'10". That's still true. They still want to only make you a nickel, but that is less of a knock than it used to be. When people like Corn Elder a couple of drafts ago, fell, that made sense, right? A lot of people didn't want those guys, but now you take a look at like 5'10", 5'9" corners that can only play in the nickel. Now they're going potentially in the 2nd and 3rd round if they're playing well enough to warrant it.
You know what, Ari? To that point, I think wingspan is actually even a little more important than height. I would give up a 5'10" or a 5'11" guy if I knew his wingspan. If he had that extra inch on his arms, I could deal with that because it still gives him the opportunity to make plays on the ball.
Yeah, actually, I think last year, I wish I remembered who it was, but there was a cornerback who was under 6 feet tall that had 31.5 or 32-inch arms, and his wingspan specifically was even longer than you'd expect for his arm length, and scouts considered him basically a 6'1" corner who just had 5'10" height, because you're not deflecting passes with your head, you're doing it with your arms, right?
Exactly.
So, I think that is playing a role in some of these guys that have like interesting proportions that really help them.
I was surprised to see Newman standing that far ahead of everyone else. He's 45 as your safety 1. Then you have to go all the way to 61 to get to Javon Bullard. Then you have to drop all the way to 70 to get to your kind of next thicker cluster of safeties. Newman really was consistently the number 1 corner, safety rather, on most of these boards when you went through them.
Not super consistently, but generally, yeah. Safety is a position where you really just kind of have to pick your flavor. Now, the thing with Newman is that because Minnesota asked him to do so much stuff last year, which wasn't true the year before, he really showcased his versatility to play, box, play high, play nickel, do a lot of other stuff and do it really well. Whereas a lot of these safeties have really only asked to do one thing, and all of these guys did that one thing pretty well. Some of them have athletic limitations or whatever. And so it's really just, do I prefer a box safety who can tackle well, takes good tackling angles, or do I like a center fielder with a lot of range that has the ability to close down on a deep ball against a fast receiver? So a lot of that is just kind of pick your flavor, and the versatile safeties have been doing a little bit better as a result of that. But Newman is not universally regarded as like the number 1 safety or anything like that. He's just kind of generally regarded as the top safety. There's not really a ton of agreement on this class here.
Ari, final question from me, and again, this may be a little bit of a difficult one to answer, but since the Combine, there's basically been an understanding by me and by talking to folks that probably after the 4th round, this draft falls off a cliff because of the NILs, because of the COVID years and the guys staying in, et cetera, et cetera. The back end of this draft is like a mess, the last 3 rounds. That's kind of the impression that I've gotten. Could you tell by compiling your boards that roughly there was a point, a focal point, where it just seems to become so scattershot because the talent is not that easily identifiable? Is that possible? You could have identified that or no?
Yeah, usually when the talent drops off, like you mentioned, there is a very small amount of difference between all the players in terms of talent, so the rankings kind of explode a little bit.
Right.
That does actually happen a little bit in the 70s. I don't think that that's because of a talent drop-off. I just think that there's, a bunch of different players there that are kind of interesting. But here it happens around pick like one or player 160, so a little bit later than you'd expect based off of the conversation. But yeah, there is some level of like disagreement over like, hey, I really like this one receiver, so I'm going to put him up really high. Like a Jacob Cowing, he's somebody that if you like him a lot. If you don't like him, you don't like him very much at all. And that happens with like a ton of players around this range. Personally, looking at these players, I think it's fine. I think that the depth is fine. But, based off of what people have been saying and based off of looking at that board, it really does seem like there's a lot more disagreement in the 160 to 200 range than you typically see.
All right, final question for me, Arif, and really great stuff, great information. 2 other positions on day 2 the Giants might attack are the kind of 3 technique defensive tackle and then running back. I wonder how jammed up those 2 position groups are on day 2, how much consensus there is, and how many players, frankly, at each spot could really be in the mix in round 2 or round 3.
People really like the round 3, round 4 running back group. I mean, that's definitely an area where people have a lot of their favorites, whether, it's kind of a sleeper like Kamani Vidal, who probably won't be drafted until round 5 or 6, or somebody like an Isaac Orendo or Braylon Allen or a Will Shipley or whoever. I think that running back group is something that people, at the top it's not that great, but that people kind of like in the middle or late part of the draft. So that there's something there. At 3 technique, it is a little bit tougher. You've got some players that are more athlete than player right now, somebody like a Mason Smith from LSU.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some players that are really good at stuffing the run, like Dwayne Carter, but you kind of wonder about the pass rush. It's a really great top of defensive tackle class, but I think when you get to round 2, round 3, it becomes really difficult to get the guys that you think can really make a huge difference as pass rushers.
Awesome stuff. Arif, once again, tell the folks where they can find the board and then everything else that you're up to that you want them to know about.
Yeah, sure. You can find the board over at wideleft.football. I do a lot of analysis based off of the board, who people disagree on the most, what the team grades are going to be after the draft, what kind of boards disagree with each other. But I also, have in-depth discussions about the state of the sports writing industry. I have a piece called The Rise and Fall of the Draft Network, which is entirely about, how one big player in the industry, kind of made it big and then kind of crumbled. So there's a lot of stuff you can find over at wideleft.football. There is a little bit of, political talk and cultural criticism. You can avoid that if you want. But there's a lot of in-depth, football conversation that's happening over there.
Funny, you mentioned your story in the Draft Network. I read a lot of that. I'm sure one of the guys that you a lot of anonymous quotes in there, but Kyle Krabs, we just had on, was one of the guys that helped found that thing. So I'm sure you have some experience there as well. Good stuff, my friend. Let's do this again soon. Awesome work. Keep it up, and we'll talk to you down the road. Enjoy the
thanks so much.
Wind up to the draft here, my friend.
Yeah. Absolutely. Have a good one.
Hey, you too. Great job. Arif Hasan, again, go check out his stuff. Awesome stuff from our two guests today.
And Arif has been doing this a long time. I believe he's based in Minnesota still, right? Mm-hmm. And his collection of just getting all the data from all the top boards, he has been, I gotta say, it's at least 15 years?
A long time, and he's been coming.
It's
on
a
with
long
us for
time,
4 or 5 years.
And then he went to the Athletic for for a while, and now he's got his site up. And what I like about him is that he's not giving you any opinions. He's not giving you his own film tape.
He's a data guy.
He's just giving you, okay, this is the collection of what the experts have said, and so this is their generic consensus. And that's good just to have as a frame of reference. So I appreciate talking to him. There was some very interesting trends and things to discuss.
Yeah, a lot of fun. I agree. And guys, go check out that consensus war because it is useful. Usually these guys do fall in the range of where they are on the board, so it's a good way to figure out who might be there when your team is selecting, when the Giants are selecting at 47, just to give people an idea. And then, Wilson, we're going to get to you before we wrap up. Don't you worry. So around 47, just to give you an idea. Starting at 40, these are the players on his consensus board for the Giants at 47. Then I'll give you third round as well. Ennis Rakestraw at 40. Zach Frazier, 41, the center. Kingsley Suamataia at 42. Kamari Lassiter, the corner, at 43. Peyton Wilson, the linebacker, at 44. Tyler Nubin, the safety, at 45. Xavier Legette, wide receiver, 46. Cooper Beebe, offensive guard, 47. 48 is Braden Fisk. 49th is Ricky Pearsall, the wideout. Chris Braswell, the edge rusher, at 50. Chris Jenkins, the 3-technique or 5-technique defensive tackle, at 51. Roman Wilson, 52. TJ Tampa, 53. So that's kind of the 6 guys before and after the Giants at 47. Paul, at the top of your head, what's the Giants' third-round pick? What are they? What is it?
70?
Is it 69 or 70?
I thought it was 70. I thought it was 70. I was simply going to say before you go there.
Yes, go ahead, please.
The list you just mentioned, do you notice, folks? Various positions.
Yep.
Really good quality at various positions, which means the Giants are at a good spot in both the first and second rounds to get high-quality players at positions they'll need.
So let's start.
It's going to match up.
In round 3, let's start at pick 65 because that's the first pick of the third round. All right, this is what is on his board. Jalen Polk, wide receiver, Washington. Adisa Isaac, edge rusher, Penn State. Michael Hall, defensive tackle, Ohio State. Rook Ororo, Clemson, defensive tackle. I love that name so much. I can't even. It's the best. And that is how you pronounce it. I'm not being funny with it. That's how you say
Zoinks!
it. Exactly.
Gee, Scooby!
Malachi Corley, wide receiver, Western Kentucky, 69. Jaden Hicks at 70. Max Melton, 71, the corner. Kalen Bullock and Cole Bishop, back-to-back safeties at 72 and 73. Kieran, I've not practiced this name enough yet. The offensive tackle out of Yale, Kieran Amagadije.
Don't even look at me.
I think, at offensive tackle. Jonah Ellis, who I really like. I have a second-round grade on him at 75. Jalen McMillan, wide receiver, 76. Brandon Dorless, defensive tackle, 77. Jalen Wright, running back, 78. And then Dominic Puny, an offensive guard, at 79. So that's where you have there the picks around the Giants. And again, a lot of positions of need for the Giants in that group of players.
To refer back to what he had just said about his consensus board, he said at 160, it seems to drop off. That's the middle of the 5th round.
And the Giants pick a 166. That's
correct.
They swapped their 5th round picks this year. So.
Yes. So just so you have a frame of reference, when he said about 160 is where the cliff seems to start to
Which is
drop.
right towards the end of the 5th round.
Right. I think it's somewhere in the middle because of the compensatories.
Oh, that's right, with the compensatories. You're right.
Yeah,
You're right.
Maybe a little bit below the halfway mark of the 5th.
Yeah, about two-thirds.
Two-thirds of the way down.
Through, maybe
2/3 of the way down in the 5th round. That's where he found the most evidence of a drop, just so you have that.
All right, our buddy Wilson in Roxbury has been holding the entire program. We thank you for being patient. Wilson, I see your topic. Don't bring any Charles Davis slander into this house because I will not hear it.
What? Oh, man, you're killing me. All right, listen.
Charles Davis is one of the nicest, kindest people you will ever meet. Do not say anything bad
You would
about
be the
Charles
first
Davis.
person in the world to say something bad about him. He's a great dude.
I love Charles Davis.
Okay, good. So then we're good. Go ahead.
No. What, Johnny? No, you got me all messed up. What Charles Davis told you something that I've been telling you for the past 3 months.
Okay.
That he is that this draft can go either way. John Mara can let Joe Schoen say, okay, let's reset the clock, or he can go the other way and say, Joe, we're paying a quarterback a lot of money, we're paying a defensive lineman a lot of money. You better get me some players because we want to win. We need to win games now.
Or John Mara will say,
to
Joe Schoen, do whatever you think is best, and then Joe Schoen's going to do whatever he thinks is best, which is exactly what happens.
But it can't be like that, Johnny, because we cannot reset the clock again.
If John Mara gives his general manager the freedom to make these decisions. And Wilson, it's not a matter of resetting the clock. It's a matter of picking the player that you think has the best chance to impact winning. And even if that means, if you want to use the term resetting the clock, that's fine. Even if it means taking maybe extending the process or taking a small step back to take multiple steps forward later, if that in the big picture is the right thing to do, that's what you should do. And John Mara is going to give Joe Schoen the freedom to do that.
But Wilson, did you hold on? I'm gonna say one thing to you, Wilson, and I mean this. I'm not trying to be a wise guy. John Mara has said that the only time that he gets involved in the draft process and says, "Wait a minute, red light, stop," is if there's something in that player personnel file that says to him, "I'm not going to have this guy on my team." John has said that. That's where he puts up the red light and says, you can't take him. There's a problem in that personnel file. We don't want that guy on our team.
Go ahead, Wilson.
That's it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, listen. John, guys, listen. We're paying Brian Burns, I think, $80 million, right? I don't know how many years. I don't know the contract. Maybe 2 or 3 years. I don't know what it is. But I'm saying, so if we reset the clock, right?
Yeah.
Why are we paying this guy for then? We're not going to be any good anyway.
No, but see, Wilson, I think, and I get what you're saying. I think the problem is that fans often view this in black and white terms. Are you all in or trying to win, or do you not care at all about winning and you're tanking, you're trying to get a high pick? That's not how NFL films. That's not how NFL films. NFL teams function, right?
No, I know that, Johnny. Johnny, I know that. But listen, I just don't know how to phrase this the right way.
Well, Wilson, time out, real quick. The advantage of taking a rookie quarterback, right, is that you have him on his rookie contract for 5 years. And it gives you the financial flexibility to add really good players around him. So if you draft a rookie quarterback this year, you have him for 5 years, right, and you're trying to win on that rookie contract, doesn't having a 25-year-old edge rusher on a 5-year contract help that?
Listen, Johnny. I know how the NFL works. I love you guys, but I think I've been watching for a while. I know how everything works. I guess Johnny. At the end of the day, man, I'm just tired of the same thing over and over. We had one good year. Daniel Jones. I don't think Daniel Jones had a fair chance. He made the playoffs. He won a playoff game with basically nothing.
No, Wilson, I get it.
With third receivers, and now again we're gonna reset again. I'm just saying.
No, but Wilson, that's why you're right. You're right. And that's why you just don't draft a quarterback for the sake of drafting a quarterback. We agree with you. You only draft the quarterback if you think that he is significantly better. That's why you draft the quarterback. So it's just a matter of how you evaluate it.
I don't think they are. Listen, I'd rather have something that, it's not the best. I'd rather have a Toyota Corolla that at least it gets me to work every day. Okay, I can go 100 miles an hour, But I don't know if I want to buy a Ferrari that might be in the shop for every other weekend, and I don't know if it's going to turn out to be any good. We have a quarterback. Let's just give him a chance.
Wilson.
By the way, Wilson,
ahead,
this is the first Daniel Jones Toyota Corolla comp I've heard, which I like, by the way. It's not bad.
Wilson, this is why, though. Wilson, this is why at no position do you force it. That's why the Giants' philosophy in general has been best player available. Because to force somebody out of need is usually a bad idea.
Correct.
Well, I'm just a little scared because if I was reading like between the lines.
Well, you're reading too much. Don't read all that garbage.
Press conference. I was certainly last month. I was certainly that we're not taking a quarterback. After I heard Joe Shane in his press conference, I'm not too sure now, Paulie. I'm not going to.
Really, you think? Honestly, Wilson, I did not walk out of that auditorium yesterday thinking they were more likely to draft a quarterback than when I walked in. Frankly,
you didn't, Johnny?
No, honestly, I didn't.
Nope.
I didn't. I feel the same exact way I felt from the start of this process, that they like Daniel Jones as a quarterback. If he's a starter, they're fine with it. But if they think that they have a, Aaron Rodgers level future quarterback in this draft, yeah, of course you're going to try to go after and get that guy because he's a potential you think he could be a Hall of Fame quarterback, which can, like they did with Eli Manning, elevate your team for a span of 15 to 17 years. So that's where I stood before I walked in yesterday, and that's where I stand now.
I'm going to second him, Wilson. I didn't sniff anything that said to me they were going to force a quarterback. I'm sorry. I did not.
Maybe I'm just frustrated just to even entertain the thought that we have to reset everything again. It's like I said. I want to look forward to this this season, Paulie. With maybe a top receiver.
It's okay.
Wilson, I get you.
And then it's like it takes the air out of the balloon. And listen, thanks, guys. And no, Johnny, I love Charles Davis.
Okay, good.
We're glad.
Excellent.
We
Thank
do
you,
too.
Wilson. Appreciate the call,
too.
my friend. That's awesome. Now, again, I'll try to make the point I tried to make before. You're not doing a complete reset even if you draft a quarterback, right? There are different ways of going about this. You don't just have to be, terrible, draft a quarterback, be terrible for 2 more years and build up, okay? You can, in fact, one of the big philosophies of team building is that you build as good of a team as you can, then you try to drop the quarterback in. Mm-hmm. The problem is that a lot of times you get too good and your access to the quarterback isn't there because you're picking like the Broncos, like the Vikings, like the Raiders in the teens, right? Mm-hmm. Or in the early 10s. So it's harder to get in the position to take that quarterback. That's why when you're picking as high as you are at 6, and the Giants have some really high-quality players at the beginning of their primes, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau becomes that guy.
Banks.
Andrew Thomas. You hope Banks, again, becomes one of those guys, still on his rookie deal. But you have enough young pieces here where you hope you could drop that quarterback in, and you don't have that 2 more years of being terrible. If that quarterback's really good, well, maybe you can compete for a playoff spot right away. Even if maybe he doesn't play the first year. Maybe Daniel Jones competes for a playoff spot on his own. Or next year. Then when the quarterback's on his rookie deal still, you could figure out a way to get that big-time receiver in with him over the course of next offseason, right? Whether it's through trade or the draft or however you do it. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden you have a team you think you can compete with. It's not necessarily, they started rebuilding. Now they got to tear it all down and start from scratch again just because you have the quarterback. That's not how it works. You drop the quarterback into the building process you've already been in over the last 2 years.
Wilson, just to further expand on that point, understand this. If the Giants are all in on a quarterback prospect this year, okay, let's just say hypothetically they are. There's one guy amongst this class.
Or
follow
even 2.
Me here, John.
Maybe there are 2.
All right.
Who knows?
But let's say there's the ability to trade up and get one guy or one of the 2 guys that they think is in this quarterback class that they have to have. Let's hypothetically go there for 1 second. The fact is, with Denver, with Minnesota, with their 2 first-round picks, and with Las Vegas, all likely to be in the bidding for those same players, it is going to cost you an exorbitant amount of draft capital to outbid those teams to get said player.
The only advantage is that the Giants are picking 6th.
They are.
So if the other team still wants to make sure they get one of these wide receivers, for example, they're not going to want to go back as far as 11, 12, and 13. That's the one. And again, Maybe that's not how these teams are thinking, but that would be the one advantage the Giants have in that bidding process.
That, of course, only takes into account, though, this year's linear first round. If you're talking about giving them next year's first and next year's 2, now that's another whole basket of fruit.
Absolutely.
And, look, I'll tell you something right now. It's not a surprise. I've been told the Vikings will go to the end of the earth in a bidding war.
And I think Sean Payton's proven he's willing to do that in the past too to get what he wants.
He's shown that as well.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So the price is going to go through the moon if you really want to trade up and go get said player. So I will give you the argument that A, I don't believe the Giants are going to force a quarterback, and B, I don't think they're going to pay through the moon to go trade for one. I just don't.
Well, we got one more week, not even. We have 3 more days of these calls ready to go here talking draft. So next week, I'll give you the BBK schedule, all right? We got Lance and Paul on Monday. We're going to work on try to get one guest for that show. It's Lance and Howard on Tuesday. I might try to jump in on that show and drop my big board of my rankings, and I'll let Lance and Howard pick them apart. They will love it. I'm going to be a pincushion, and they're just going to start jabbing me. Because Howard and Lance never disagree with people on anything. So that's going to go swimmingly if I decide to put myself into that relentless.
Howard has Turner in his top 5.
And then on Wednesday, Bob Papa will be joining me on Big Blue Kickoff Live. We're going to have Charlie Campbell, who does a great job getting intel on the draft. He's going to join us at 1 o'clock that day to tell us kind of the latest of what's going on. A couple good huddles next week, too. Derek Klassen, who does a great job on the quarterbacks and wide receivers and running backs. He's going to join. I think that's going to be Monday's show. Going to get Brandon Thorne, who's their offensive line analyst over at Bleacher Report. He's going to join us on another day on the Giants Huddle, so check all that out. And then for the draft, folks, Paul and I are going to come on. Sean O'Hara might be on with one of us on one of those nights, too. We're going to come on when the Giants make their pick in round 1. And we're going to come on when the Giants on Thursday night, and we're going to come on when the Giants make their pick in round 2 on Friday night. And we'll take your calls live during the draft, reacting to those picks, and then we'll be on at some point on Saturday, too. We got to figure out the timing on that, but it'll probably be around when the Giants pick in round 4 or maybe slightly before they get on the clock. So that's where we are. That's what our coverage is going to be next week. Make sure you tune into it and stay tuned to Giants.com, the Giants mobile app, Giants YouTube channel, all of our other platforms as we continue to dissect this NFL draft, which is now finally less than a week away. Thank you to Kyle Krabs. Thank you to Arif Hasan. They did a fantastic job today.
Excellent
really good
stuff.
job by those guys. Hope you enjoyed those spots. I know we did. We'll make sure we have time for calls next week, guys. We don't have a ton of guests, so it's going to be a lot of calls over the next week, next 3 days. We're going to rapid fire them so we get in as many as we can to get your draft.
Get some new callers in there. Come on, don't be shy.
So stay tuned to Big Blue Kickoff Live. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Let's go Knicks. We will be 1 game into the series. By the time we get back on Monday, I will be there on Saturday night. I'm pumped up. Go beat those Philadelphia 76ers, please, sir.
Go, New York, go, New York, go!
Turns out a delightfully clean home can make for a delightful start to the day. At Mrs. Meyer's, everything they make is inspired by the garden. With plant-derived and other thoughtfully chosen ingredients, their cleaning products smell like a dream and work like the Dickens, leaving your home sparkly clean and your to-do list tackled in no time. Goodness, there's no better feeling than that. Mrs. Meyer's, rooted in goodness. Visit mrsmeyers.com today.
Tired of restless nights? At Lisa, we know good sleep is essential for mental, physical, and emotional health. From memory foam mattresses to hybrids that keep you cool all night long, Lisa's mattresses offer exceptional comfort and support with free delivery and 100 nights to try out your mattress in the comfort of your home. For a limited time, save up to $700 off select mattresses plus 2 free pillows. Go to lisa.com/iHeart for an additional $50 off mattresses and select goods. Exclusions apply. See lisa.com for more details.